Guys, let's go. We're ready. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. All right, we'll get started. Good morning again. My name is Gordon Everett. I'm the Director of Customer Relationship Management for the Federal Record Center program. And we'd like to thank you all for coming out on what should feel like later today, a spring day in Washington. And for those of you who are attending via YouTube, we welcome you also.
Slides. Let me just bring up the slides.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that.
There you go. Do I need to move them? No. All right, good.
Right.
Okay. So this morning, we did have to cancel our normal coffee hour, and that was due to a shelter-in-place drill we had here in the building in Archives 1. And we didn't want to inconvenience our guests who were in the building today. So we will go back to our normal coffee hour and coffee hour session on the next meeting on April 24th. So we look forward to seeing you all on that day. A little bit about the agenda for the day. We have 4 key areas we want to have a discussion on. We'll have an update from Alina Simo, OGIS update. We'll also have a 2018 agency disposition profile and ambiguous disposition code by Scott Rowley from our National T&D team, and Marcus Most, the Special Assistant in Records Management Operations. We also get a look at last month, everyone participated, we hope, in the BRIDG survey. So you'll get some of those results from Lisa Hara-Lampus and Jim Stossel. We'll introduce Lisa again in a few minutes, but Jim is our outreach specialist in the Chief Records Officer's office. We're also going to have a panel today on the NARA strategic priorities, and we'll have Lawrence Brewer, the Chief Records Officer, David Weinberg, Director of the Federal Record Centers Program, Maggie Hawkins, Director of Records Management Operations, Gary Rauchfuss, Director of Records Management Training. Make sure I don't leave anybody. Lisa Hara-Lampus, Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach, and Don Rosen, the Director of Records Management Oversight and Policy. This afternoon, we'll also have a meet and greet session. Will be held with appraisal teams 2 and 4, and that's from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the Washington Conference Room, and it's back on the mezzanine level of this building. You'll have an opportunity there to meet with your appraisal archivist, the FRC, your FRC account managers, and the records accessioning staff. We do here encourage all of the agencies to participate in BRIDG by presenting best practices or lessons learned that you may find helpful for other agencies. So if you wish to do that, Jim Stossel is our outreach person for the program, and his email is james.stossel, S-T-O-S-S-E-L, @nara.gov, and we'd certainly welcome and invite any of our agencies to bring some best practices that we can share with other agencies. So with that, let me say for the folks online who want to ask questions remotely, you can email to rm.communications@nara.gov, and we have someone monitoring that site, and we'll get your questions asked in the room. So with that, we'll start with, is it Alina Seymour or Amy Bennett? We'll see. It's going to be Amy? All right. Come on forward, Amy. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I know we're all missing the coffee and donuts, but hopefully you've still had some sugar and caffeine and you're ready to talk some records management. Before you get into records management, I'm going to give you a quick update on some really fun upcoming open government events that are scheduled across the government and here at the National Archives. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some work that's been going on at the FOIA Advisory Committee. So how many of you know what Sunshine Week is? Have you ever heard of it? All right, that's about half of you. That's really good. So Sunshine Week is an initiative that was launched more than a decade ago by the American Society of News Editors to really bring attention to the role that government records play in informing the public about the government's actions. And since this initiative was launched, it's really grown into something that has been embraced not only by newspapers, by journalists, but also by civil society organizations, by libraries, and by the government itself as an opportunity to talk about the kinds of things that we're doing to make our records and our actions more open to the public. So I want to tell you about a couple of events that you should go ahead and mark down on your calendars. So on Monday, March 12th, that's the kickoff of Sunshine Week, and I should say that this is centered around James Madison's birthday, since he's kind of the father of open government, which is on the 16th. We don't have any events on there. But Monday, March 12th, the kickoff is at the Department of Justice. They're going to have a morning event in the Great Hall over at the Department of Justice. And at that event, they present awards for outstanding FOIA programs or FOIA agency officials in the federal government. We're then going to have an event here at the National Archives in the afternoon in the William McGowan Theater. This event is not just about FOIA. It looks a little bit more broadly at open government. We will have a keynote address from Senator Patrick Leahy, who has been a longtime champion of the Freedom of Information Act. We're also going to have a panel that looks at innovation, so how technology and new approaches to government are really changing the way that the government operates and that we interact with people. We're also going to look at digital engagement. So we're looking specifically at Congress. So we all know that Congress gets a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. How on earth do they manage all of that influx of comments coming in and actually make sense of it? And then we're also going to look at the road ahead on open data. So hopefully you'll join us for that. If you're interested, just go to the OGIS blog, the FOIA Ombudsman, and we have our full agenda up there. On Tuesday, there's also going to be an event at the Commerce Department downtown, and they're going to do some kind of TED-like talks focusing on open government issues. And then there's also, for those of you out in Maryland, there is a 2-day-long speaker bureau at the Census Department. And on Wednesday, there's also going to be an event here at the National Archives that focuses on how users can really use the National Archives, how they can access and use the National Archives records. So I've already kind of gone through our program here. I should say the National Archives is actually also doing one other Sunshine Week-centric event. We're going to be using the Citizen Dashboard. Have any of you ever heard of the National Archives Citizen Dashboard? Okay, a couple of you. Some of you have some Googling to do because this is really fun to use. So the Citizen Dashboard is a way that it opens up the National Archives catalog. So the catalog contains, Lawrence can tell me how many records, a lot of records, not all of which can be read by machines. So there's a lot of handwritten material, a lot of things that don't have the kind of rich metadata that we now associate with electronic records. So it opens up those records and allows members of the public to do that transcription, to add in that metadata, to tag the records appropriately. And then it makes the records more usable by everybody across the world. So it's a great way to learn a little bit about history and to really make a contribution to the United States in our understanding of our history. They're going to be focusing on transcribing the records related to the Pentagon Papers, and that's going to be an entire month-long event. So hopefully you will check out the Citizen Dashboard, and you will also join us for our event on Monday. All right, so now moving on to the FOIA Advisory Committee. The FOIA Advisory Committee is an attempt to use one of our bedrock open government laws, the Federal Advisory Committee Act, to make improvements to one of our other bedrock open government laws, the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. So what we've done is we've brought together 10 experts from inside the agencies, agency FOIA professionals, and 10 experts from outside of the government to talk about A, what are the biggest problems in FOIA, and B, not what we disagree on, but what we actually agree about. So our idea is that if we can find common ground, then we can make some real progress rather than just fighting over, the perfect answer all the time. So the areas that the FOIA Advisory Committee has decided to look into are first proactive disclosure. So the idea that if we can put out records before a FOIA request ever comes in, that's good for FOIA, that's good for the public, it improves our understanding of the government's actions. And then related to that is also accessibility. When I say accessibility, I mean 508, compliance with Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. This is a particular problem with FOIA because when you apply a FOIA exemption, it turns a record into an image so that the redactions can't be reverse engineered and taken off. So when you turn it into an image, it takes out all that rich information that makes the records available to people, who have trouble seeing. And then they've also looked at how this will be of particular interest to this audience. Given the ever-growing number of records the government is creating, how on earth can FOIA programs sufficiently search for records? So they're looking at strategies to improve searches for records. And then they're also looking at efficiencies and resources. So they used annual data to determine what agencies seem to be doing something really well. And then they followed up with interviews of those agencies. And then they tried to find best practices that other agencies could use to have the same kinds of results. So they have completed all of their kind of background research and discussions at this point, and they've actually come up with more than a dozen direct recommendations. So these are actions that can be taken by the National Archives, by my office, the Office of Government Information Services, by the Department of Justice Office of Information Policy, which has some responsibilities for FOIA across the government, and the Chief FOIA Officer Council, and the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council to improve both searches and accessibility. So the good news is you guys are off the hook. We don't have anything for agency FOIA, for agency records management officers. And then we also have a pretty extensive list of best practices to improve practice disclosure, accessibility, FOIA searches, and efficiencies. If you're interested in any of this material, it's all up on our website. The committee is going to be completing its work on April 17th and then sending the recommendations to the archivist. So hopefully we're going to have some good outcomes from that. And if you have any questions about it, please follow up with me. And we have, because it's the Federal Advisory Committee Act, you are required to have all sorts of information about the committee's work on the website. So please come and surf around a little bit. That's it for me. Thank you.
Do we get any questions, Jim? Coming? No questions? Okay. All right. So next we're going to give you 2-for-1 on this one. We'll have Marcus Most and Scott Rowley on agency disposition profiles and ambiguous disposition codes. Gentlemen?
So yeah, we're going to be kind of a tag team here today, and it's because these two issues are very sort of integrated there. Do I need to go like this to make it advance? No, I do not. Good start, huh? So anyway, my name's Scott Rowley. I'm the Director for Transfers and Dispositions for the Federal Records Centers program. And this is kind of the story of the last 5 years of my life kind of thing, it seems like. Those who know my background, I used to do this kind of job for the record centers in the 1990s, and about 5 or 6 years ago, I came back to work for the record centers in a more electronic era. 15 years had passed, it had become a revolving fund, all these kinds of things had changed. And the landscape that we were looking at that time was hard because records were flowing into the buildings, but records weren't coming out of the buildings because agencies weren't signing off on disposal at the rate we'd like to, because more and more appraisal decisions were getting tabled, or we weren't pursuing screening projects we'd agreed on as an agency with another agency. And more and more records were under litigation holds. And lastly, OMB had said, don't get any more new buildings. There was a no net new policy in place then. So how do you live within your footprint when you're destroying about a third of the volume of records that are coming into your building each year? So, you know, every year you're going to have to buy another bay of record centers. So this is sort of the story of how all these things went. We turned the corner. We're now heading in the right direction. We're destroying more than is coming in. We haven't obtained any new space, and we're able to start looking at some of these other things. So that's the high-level look, and so let's get into the presentation here. As I said, I'm with Transfers and Disposition, and this is the other team members, and we do more than worry about disposal, but disposals, transfers, but disposals obviously is the big story here. We assist agencies, we do special projects working with agencies. We're available to help all the time. It's a really good team. Many of you who've worked with us. Stephanie Montgomery's up there in the audience. The rest of the team are around the country, although my other DC member, Russell Loisel, has to stay home with an injury. And those who know my team well might notice that one key person is missing, Patrick Weigel, who was on the team for the first 5 years. And he was promoted about 6 years ago. He's now the director of the Seattle Federal Record Centers. So congratulations to Patrick, our loss, his gain. But the team is still great and does a good job. So if you need us, call us. So every year it seems like I come here, I talk about the disposition profile, which is basically our first effort of trying to get agencies to sign off on disposal more, to deal with their, what I used to call limbo codes, these various appraisal decisions or analyses of records that stop the disposition on records. We've got more professional over time. We now call them ambiguous disposition codes, but if I fall into limbo, which is nice and pithy and whatever, you'll know that's where that's coming from. So we put out the disposition profile and tried to really encourage agencies by showing them the costs and so forth to sign off on disposal. I can't take credit for it. We did want agencies to pay a lot more attention to disposal and analyzing the freezes they had in place. But the big player in that turned out to be the tobacco industry litigation, the till freeze, and it was lifted on its own. You know, but it was in that time period where we really got to do something about these freezes, and getting that lifted was a great help to us because at that point, 2.2 million cubic feet became immediately eligible for disposal. We said we'd address that over 3 years, working with the agencies, and declaring some victory here. Around January 1 for the April disposal cycle, we sent out the last notices to all but 2 agencies who wanted to start a year later. So essentially all the till disposal notices have been delivered to agencies. And that 3-year project is successfully coming to an end. So the result of all that was we destroy a lot of records every year. Our baseline, because we have some temporary series that flow through pretty quickly every year and large, is about 800,000 to 1 million cubic feet is sort of our baseline. So that 1.5 million cubic feet, which we've been able to do over the last 4 years, including the prediction for this year, represents over 500,000 more on top of all that work. So pretty astounding number. If the math I always do is 1,000 feet a truck. Well, how many trucks is that? We had some analysis that was like 10 or 12 trucks a week were leaving from all the different record centers. It was pretty busy. So to make all that happen, one of the things we did, many of you know who work with the Federal Record Centers, we have the ARCIS system, which is our database that controls the records and so forth. And processing all these disposal notices was really hard. Way too often it was just one box, so it's just as much processing for one box as 1,000 boxes on this disposal process. We've got to review that it's the right records we're sending to you and asking for your permission to destroy. Got the right disposal authority attached to it. If we count the years from the ending date, it's the retention period's been met, all those kinds of things. So to speed up our throughput and get more control over the whole process, we built a new disposal module in ARCUS, which does a bunch of, and I talked about this last year, so I'm only going to give you a couple highlights, but it does automated edits at the front end of the disposal process. We don't look at every single transfer before we ask you for disposal permission now. We use the power of ARCUS to test whether the disposition authority is valid, the math between the ending date and the retention, established retention period's been met, all those kinds of things. So if it meets all those criteria, you can then send that disposal notice to the agency. And in the 90s, many of you may know, the old Record Centers program used to say, if we don't hear from you in 90 days, we're going to throw it out, which wasn't a great policy, but that's what it was. And nowadays, we don't throw anything out till we get a concurrence from you, till we have a signature. Much more, so you really are getting a deeper review than our first review. You get a deep review on your side when you receive the disposal notices, and then you return them to us with a concurrence, and then our last step before throwing it out, and this way we're only dealing with the ones you actually want to throw out instead of everything under the universe that might be eligible to send you a notice. We'll pull up the 135, we'll take a look at it, we'll make sure everything in ARCUS matches any other data that you may have missed and so forth. So we're in sort of a just-in-time way reviewing those things as you send back your concurrences. So a big part of that disposal module, and I want to remind everybody, whether you're doing much disposal, whether you're in the annual move, but if you're with us in the ARCUS portal and if you've got records in our record center, and those transfers are in a disposition status, whether it's part of the annual move and they're permanent, or we're trying to gain your concurrence in destroying the records, the SF-135 will be attached in ARCUS, and you can go in and look at that. And that's only been in the last couple of years, and that's really a big breakthrough, because agencies over time have lost their 135, or you're the central records officer and the records were retired from the field, so you have no access to that. You'd have to call the field people and say, send me something or whatever. Now you can cut out the middleman, go straight, look in ARCUS and see the 135, and often the 135 will provide enough information for whatever decision you have to make, signing off on the permanent move in ERA or giving us concurrence on our disposal. So this has allowed us to do a lot more throughput. And so one of the things we did was institute a July catch-up cycle, which was, if we don't hear from you on disposal for 2 years, we put it back to shelf. That's been our regular process. And back in 2013, 2014, there was this huge back volume of unanswered disposal notices, and to keep putting them out every July was too much work when we wanted to concentrate on other things, especially when the agency history kind of was they wouldn't sign off on them. So we suspended this process for a couple years while we built this new module, concentrated on other things, dealt with TIL, and now that everything's in place, we're able to reinstitute this July catch-up cycle. So on or around April 1, for the July cycle, you have 90 days to review. We're going to put out 20,000 disposal notices from this catch-up cycle. And one of the important things about this is NARA is changing its rates for FRCP beginning in 2019. Jeff Lunsford, the financial analyst, reported on this in October at BRIDG, and all of you who have your interagency agreement, it shows what the 2019 rates are going to be versus the 2018 rates if you want to look at that. But the point is, you're going to pay more if you've not been signing off on disposal, or if you've not been signing off on permanent records. And the third category they're going to charge you extra on is unscheduled records. And so all three of these we've been working on for years. The annual move has been in place for 5 years, so everything that was backlogged, everybody's had at least one chance to sign off on it in ERA. We've been working with these disposition profiles for 5 years, trying to encourage you to sign off. The Managing Government Records Directive asked agencies to schedule all their unscheduled records by 2016, and gee, there's only 400,000 cubic feet left in the record centers. So I think, Nora, this is me assuming, but we feel we've done enough that it's time to raise the bar for you guys a little more for all the work we keep trying to put into it, but getting no return out of it. So one nice thing about this July catch-up cycle is basically either, as I told you, we keep our disposal notices active for 2 years. By putting this last catch-up cycle in there, everything that's eligible for disposal we've issued to you in the last 2 years or will issue on April 1. So if you've lost them, of course, contact my team. We'll get you something. I'll talk about some other ways you can do things. But the main point is, if you don't want to pay those extra fees come October 1, you're going to have a disposal notice in hand. You can sign off on it between now and October 1, and that additional fee, which I think is approximately a dime a month per box, will not be assessed. You'll get to avoid it. Last bullet here is, I think in previous meetings we've also talked, part of this disposal module includes an agency side on this, and I'm just here to point out or state that we're still running a little behind on this. We're in our pilot phase. We've had some contractor issues and so forth. But right now it looks like October 1 will be our kickoff date to do that customer portal for all agencies. And the nice thing about that is going to be we're not going to be trading back and forth lists or the disposal notices, the NARA NA 13001. If an agency's inside the portal of ARCUS and they want to concur on a disposal, they'll be clicking inside ARCUS and it'll make that update in ARCUS to disposition concurred. No chances for paperwork to get lost between the two parties, all those kinds of things. So kind of an update of what we accomplished, some big things we're doing on the disposal side. And as I said, we set the table for this larger charge, this 10 cents a box charge coming for past due disposal. It's also set the table for a couple of things I want to point out that you may find useful. Because of the till lift and all the disposal we've been trying to do, many agencies back in 2013 and 2014, their sort of disposal review process was quite atrophied because we weren't sending many disposal notices. Some agencies had everything entirely frozen under till, so they were literally not seeing a disposal notice ever. Other agencies had segments or other things going on, but I had some record centers that were putting out 50 or 80 disposal notices in April, some of the smaller centers still, but by way of scale, never fewer than 500 or 800 or something like that now. So agencies, especially larger agencies, were getting deluged with disposal notices, and they had to set up a structure to be able to handle this review process. And if you're a very large agency, that's got to be a whole set of records liaisons and a structure to hand these notices down to lower levels, so records creators can actually be the ones who sign off on this. So you've created a whole process within your agency, and now we've been doing this for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And agencies have kind of bulked up and got better at this. And two things we've done that have helped them a lot is you can still get the disposal notices delivered from the individual record centers, but those are individual PDFs of this disposal notice. You might be getting hundreds of them or thousands of them in a quarter from different directions. And so some agencies were having a lot of trouble managing that. And so we started also, my team will give you a spreadsheet of the same notices that are going out in the individual forms. Some agencies just said, we don't even want to deal with the forms anymore. All we want is the spreadsheet. Some agencies want both the spreadsheet and the forms. And so what agencies do, they take that data now, we get a spreadsheet, here's all our April disposal, they put it up somewhere central. In many cases, I think this is what I imagine or I've heard they're doing. They might have a SharePoint or we use Drive in this agency. You put it up out there, and then your various records liaisons can report in and say, we got a concurrence here, and so forth. And then they'll take the extract out of the spreadsheet that had 2,000 transfers. Well, I've got 800 approvals. Send them back to us as a spreadsheet with a cover letter. Here's the 800 transfers we've approved disposal on. Lot better way to deal with big volumes here. So agencies like that, if that sounds intriguing, give us a call, and you might want to pursue that. The other thing that's been really powerful now about this process is now that agencies have more robust disposal review processes, we've been able to piggyback on that to get some other kinds of related reviews happening at the same time. And what's really brilliant about this, or good about this if you're a government agency, is you've already got a structure in place, you already have resources in place, you don't need extra funding to do this special project, you just need how to figure out how to put the project into the larger project. So that may be a little obscure. It's got a good relationship to what Marcus is talking about next, and we think we might be able to use this. I'll give two brief examples here. One agency had many transfers that were mixed, which means multiple series in the same box. And back when the National Archives was OE funded and we allowed the agency to do this, we said we'd go through the boxes and we'd figure it all out. Then once it became a revolving fund and agencies had to pay us to go through those boxes and figure this out, everything came to a stop. Couldn't destroy the records. There's too many different disposal authorities in here to figure out what to do. So we started working with the agency. Well, that's how should we do this? So what we agreed was we'd send them disposal notices with the understanding that we, in this case, have really not looked at everything in there, every disposal authority in there. We want you to look at it, agency, and tell us what to do. And either the agency would say, we have enough confidence in our 135 and the material we have, and we're willing to sign off on this disposal, or their records liaisons would pull the records out of the record centers. They've lost control. We don't really know what's in those boxes. We're going to pull them back to the record center or to the agency, and they're going to go through the boxes. They're going to destroy what they can. They're going to keep what still has retention on it or what's permanent, and send that back as separate transfers and so forth. The second little project along those lines was a freeze. An agency had they were scheduling they had been using the GRS for one of their series. It's now scheduled now, but they'd been using the GRS for this series, and now the series was liable to the freeze. And those of you who know how the new GRS work, they got bigger and bigger buckets, okay? That's good. Buckets are good for a lot of things, but they're not good for freezes. You like things granular for a freeze. You don't want to freeze all your GRS records because you have a freeze on some of your GRS records. So that was their problem. And how could you tell them apart? And would they have to do a big project to go through all this stuff to identify which records were liable to the freeze and which records weren't? We were, again, talking 20,000, 30,000 transfers. So we talked to the agency. We said, look, we'll send you the disposal notice. You reject the disposal notice and tell us, put it under the new authority and freeze it. And so, usually if we get anything back, it's usually 90 or 95% concurrence rate, just a few declines for most agencies. But with this agency under this new project, maybe 20% of our disposal notices get a decline, and they say, no, we want it frozen. But this is their way to freeze exactly the right records. No records get thrown out that should be frozen, but the records that aren't liable to the freeze that they have under the GRS can move ahead. So anyway, those projects are available to you. When Marcus talks about the ambiguous code, you'll see how that could be a match here.
Hey, Todd, before you leave that slide, I just want to let you know, Tommy Lee said a big thank you for inserting a copy of the original SF-135s in the forthcoming ARCIS disposal module. So apparently there's people out in their community that were waiting for that or desiring.
And tell Tommy it's already there. Or Tommy, it's already there. Thanks, Tommy. I'll tell Tommy it's already there. So thank you for that, Tommy. So yeah, talk to those who don't know how to, those who are in ARCIS, familiar with John McAvoy. If you don't know how to access the 135, he's the guy who can show you how to do that too. So thanks for that, Jim. Now focusing in more deeply on the agency disposition profile. As I said, we've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now to try and encourage agencies to take a good look at whether they're being efficient in the way they're storing records, and could they get rid of more records and save the government money and keep us from buying more buildings and so forth. That was the same year that I think they established the senior agency officials, or around that same time. So we tried to piggyback on that too. So senior agency officials who might understand dollars more than records could get a good idea there. So the way the delivery works is we'll send your profile to the senior agency official if your agency has one. A lot of agencies don't have a senior agency official, so then it just goes to the records officer. And we always copy the records officer. And then in some cases, senior agency officials or records officers their span of control is more than a single record group. So we'll send them what we call an aggregator report that'll have all the record groups they're responsible for as an individual sheet, and then there'll be an aggregated one and say, your department as a whole, this is your story, and then the individual record groups they're under. So covers the holdings, the backlogs, the freezes, what the dollar amounts are, what the savings are, and so forth. And we usually do it about 6 months into the fiscal year, and March 30th is going to be the delivery date there. I thought I had a slide in here of the, we'll get to it anyway. There's just to remind everybody we've lost a couple slides here, I think, Jim. But no big deal. Those of you who remember what the form looks like, blue form, won't show you the form. But here's the special stuff we're going to cover there. We're going to show you the closeout of the tobacco industry litigation. We're going to show you, for the first time, the dollar amounts associated with what we called on the form the pending, deferred, and other delayed disposition records. And these are a good portion of what we call ambiguous disposition codes. So we're going to show you those. We're going to show you the costs for unscheduled records, and we're going to show you the costs next year with the new charges for unscheduled records. And in the same point, we'll show you the costs for past due disposal of temporary records, what that cost will be in 2019, past due accessioning, what that cost will be in 2019. So you'll get an idea of, if I don't act this year, what it's going to cost me next year. So that's probably good enough for right now. I think covered all the stuff we're going to cover on there. I guess the last point is just I wanted to emphasize one more time, we're doing the July catch-up cycle to give everybody a chance to sign off on that disposal before October 1. On the annual move of permanent records, it'll be the last 2 years, TRs, if they're still open and not signed off on. That's what we're going to be adding the charge for. Anything else from prior years, there are some cases where agencies never had a chance to sign off, so we don't want to penalize them. So we've put them out in future years. They'll come up in the next 5 years. If you don't sign off, then you'd be liable to the surcharge. So I think that's everything I've got, and we'll give it to Marcus here.
Thanks, Scott. Morning, everybody. So I came onto about 6 months ago, I came onto this project, the Ambiguous Disposition Code project, and somebody pulled me aside and said, you can't use the word limbo code anymore. And so some people have a swear jar, so I started a limbo code jar, and I've put a lot in there. So I'm counting on you guys to count how often I say limbo codes today, and let me know at the end so that I can add the money as appropriate to my jar. All right, so let's see, how do we go on? So, no, it just says living life in limbo. It doesn't say limbo code. All right, so some of you may be asking, what is an ambiguous disposition code? And there are 7 of them. The first 5 are bundled together, and for those of you who speak ARCUS, you can find them in the disposition hold field. So pending agency action means that an agency, we're waiting on an agency to take action. That could be pulling permanent records, significant case files out of a series that's mixed. For deferred reappraisal pending, that could be either that NARA took action or that an agency asked to have that applied, where obviously the records are being reappraised. The archival sample is pretty much as it sounds, where there's a collection of records, it's mixed. NARA, the schedule says that NARA needs to go through and pull out the sample. And we've got pending legal determination. Again, pretty straightforward. We're waiting on some kind of court case to settle. And finally, the destruction prohibited by statute. This is my favorite one. So for example, we've got one instance in which we've got temporary administrative records, they're 7 years, but there's a statute that requires that they may not ever be destroyed. We also have some records that are scheduled as permanent but can never be made available to the public, ever, in perpetuity. So part of what we're doing is trying to figure out, like, how do we handle those records. The next chunk, and just for those of you who like numbers, those top 5 are 2.8 million cubic feet in the record center right now. Unscheduled, and really what I want to define here is sometimes unscheduled is used as just a placeholder to stop the life cycle from happening. What we're talking about here are records that came in without a schedule and are unscheduled. As Scott mentioned, 404,000 cubic feet. And again, for those of you who speak ARCIS, that is in the disposition code field. And then we have something called a Z code. And sometimes we just need a reason to stop the records in the life cycle. And so the Record Center used something called a Z code. And it's a 3-letter code. It functions mostly like a freeze does. And that right now is 1.1 million cubic feet. So as you can see, these 7 make up a total of about 4.3 million cubic feet in the Record Center. And at this point, I wanted to give a shout out to Scott and his team for all their help in pulling the numbers from ARCIS. All right. So following the 80-20 rule, or in this case, it's 75-25, we've identified the top 15 issues represent 3.3 million cubic feet in the system. So that's about in total, that's about 75% of the amount that we need to tackle. But if, again, just for those of you who like numbers, the 4.3 million cubic feet are about 15% of the record center that's in some kind of life cycle hold status. Let's see. All right. So what is NARA doing about it? Really what we're talking about with ambiguous disposition codes is a life cycle hold. And so because the life cycle hold can be applied by any group or any part of the life cycle, we've had to pull together a team that represents the appraisal side, the implementation side, as well as the archival side. And so we've got a team of about 10 people from each of these different sections, and we're going to be reaching out specifically to the top 15 agencies as well as other agencies to work with them to try to drive this number down. And I think it's important for us to tackle this now because, especially with the managing government directive, and also with NARA's turn away from paper records in 2022, it's really an opportunity for us to address paper records before we carry them forward into an electronic era. All right, that's everything that I've got. Did we want to take any questions?
It's up to you, Jim. Questions now, questions
Not
later?
mine right now, but
Okay.
any from the audience.
My last statement, just to give you comparing the ambiguous disposition codes to the past due disposal, over 4 million of the ambiguous disposition codes, cubic feet, we're down to 1.5 million past due disposal, which was way up around 4 or 5 million in the past. And past due accessions is about, permanent records is about 300,000 cubic feet. So you can see why dealing with 4.3 million that we don't know which pile they go in gets so important.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scott and Marcus. Next, last month, we did do a BRIDG meeting survey, sent it out to customer agencies to get your input on the BRIDG. So we're going to give you the results of the survey, some of those results, with Lisa Haralampis and Jim Stossel.
All right, good morning. So we really want to make this part of the rest of the meeting, put it that way, a lot more interactive. So please be ready. We did this survey, if you remember. I don't know, about 162 people participated. Let me go to the... There we go. Okay, so first, a ground rule here, first of all. This is not a solution discussion that we want to have today. This is just to review the results of the survey that we took and hopefully expand on them from your point of view. If you see something you want to talk about, stop us. And we have plenty of microphones around the room. We'll get one to you. It's not because your voice isn't loud enough. It's because we are streaming this session online with YouTube, and we do record the sessions. So if you don't have a microphone, it's very hard for us to get the recording down, and nobody will hear you in the future. So we sent this survey out to the same list that we send the BRIDG invitations out to. So that's about 830 some people. We got about 162 responses back. So as you can see, it's a pretty good response for this kind of survey, but we definitely didn't get all of you. So if you still want to send your responses back, you can see the website there, the link on the screen. Still welcome to send them in, and we will include it in our analysis of what we want to do with BRIDG in the future. The 162 responses, though, was about 3 times what we normally get in this kind of annual survey. So we're getting better at it, and we hope that you'll participate more in the future so we can improve these BRIDG meetings as much as possible. So first up, like I said, you can see here that a lot of people attend BRIDG regularly, so that's a great thing. And we appreciate you coming. We appreciate you coming to as many meetings as possible. Some people only attend occasionally, 1 to 3 times per year. That's fine too. If there are topics you see on the agendas that are interesting to you, we want to have you here for sure. And then to go a little bit deeper, do people attend in person? Do they only attend online, or do they tend to do both? As you can see here, a lot of our participants tend to do both. And in a normal session like this, we normally have about between 150 to 200 people online at the same time that you're sitting here physically. So we do have a pretty good audience, and again, that's why we want to keep the technology up, that the people online have as good of an experience as you do here in the theater.
Okay. So congratulations. Our first slide was, how do you attend and do you participate? So I just want to thank everybody who's in the room for showing that the numbers actually are accurate. And here you are in the room, and thank you to everybody online who are participating as well. So after we sort of asked, well, who's coming and how do you like to come, we wanted to find out from you how about the BRIDG frequency. Because as Jim said, we are not here today to debate how to change BRIDG. This is not a solution session, but it's to gather information to make sure that we can consider how BRIDG meetings could be conducted in the future to meet your needs. So the question we asked was, well, how often should we have them? What is the right frequency? And the data that you can see says we suggested a couple of options, the bi-monthly, quarterly. I believe it's a little bit, look, this is a test of my eyesight here as I look at this. I'm not going to turn around, I'm going to read the screen in front of me. Can they meet a little more often, a little less frequently? And what was interesting is as you can see the results, it's pretty split. Well, maybe once a quarter or every other month is what people like to come. So I was going to ask for a reaction to that for those of you who are in the room and for those of you who are online. Do you have any reactions to BRIDG frequency? Does this 50-50 split look about right to you? Or are there other time frames or other questions we should have asked or thought about? Like, well, no, I'd actually like to meet every other week. What would you, any reactions from you today? Well, we are warming you up, so that's the first pause. Get ready. I say, well, ask another question. Next slide. Jim.
Maybe based on some of the comments that are up there, like somebody said, it depends on whether the information is a NARA push or whether we want the involvement of the community. Yeah. So does anybody want to expand on that theme a little bit? Do you think these meetings should be more interactive with the community, or do you want to hear information from NARA every time we hold these meetings?
And you can think about that, because we're definitely going to share that again. Next slide. Oh. No, I don't have it.
I can do that.
Okay, so we talked about frequency. One of the other data points we wanted to talk about was what's the best day of the week. Because this past year, year and a half, we used to always have bridge, same time, same place every day. And what happened, as happened this morning, has just been a variety of unusual things, like we're going to have a shelter-in-place drill. Well, maybe not do it today. We had events where the auditorium was booked for another, we got bumped. So we have been switching the days of the week. I don't know if you've noticed that over the past year. You have to pay attention now. Will it be a Monday? Will it be a Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday? So we wanted to sort of ask, what's the best time? We know that Fridays and Mondays, there tend to be fewer people on the roads and in offices. But with the spike of people attending online, would it be that, go ahead and have a meeting on Monday? Because what I really am going to do is I'm just going to watch the YouTube presentation. That's easier for me to do when I'm teleworking anyway. So we were really interested, what day of the week is the best for a bridge meeting? And I don't know what it means, but our data did show that we still like Wednesdays. Our traditional Wednesday was the highest bar. Tuesday is right behind. And what I always appreciate by that, my analysis and my interpretation is right, because Tuesday and Wednesday is the hardest working days of the week. And bridge we actually are working. We are sharing information. We want to think it's like, I'm coming to bridge. This is a major part of my job, and I'm going to do it on my highest working days. So any reaction to a day of the week? You like Wednesdays? What day
Same
is
kind of thing there.
Thursday?
Like, if there's something in general that that we don't know, like, is there always a Monday meeting for all the DoD entities or somebody else that we're not aware of, so we shouldn't have it on that day or something like that? That's the kind of information that would be valuable.
And as Jim said, oh wait, somebody has volunteered to talk. Yay! Thank you.
And Courtney's filling my role online, too. So if you have questions online, go ahead and send them in. And there's about a minute delay, but we'll get to it as soon as we can.
So something to consider for Mondays and Fridays is a lot of government employees do RDO days. So they're not able to participate.
Right. That's right. Mondays and Fridays are very difficult with AWSs. And although it can happen on Wednesdays as well. So, but yeah. That's something to consider. So we're watching our numbers, and we might experiment with different days of the week. And what day this auditorium is available. Because we had a Monday meeting because we had to, I think.
That's a good point, too. I try to actually schedule these a year in advance because of the room availability. So, yeah, the quicker you can get your information to me, the better we can plan for the whole next year in advance. So, again, if there's something in general that could steer us away from something, let me know as soon as you can.
Okay. So these were the deep questions we asked with this bridge survey. But we got a lot of really rich information. So over to you, Jim, for the next two.
All right, thanks. So this one here, as you can see, a pretty big spike in the middle. So I guess we're getting this part right. I simply asked the question, which part of the bridge meeting do you think is most valuable? So we have the coffee in the morning with Gordon's team and the FRC team, and then we have in the afternoon the appraisal group with Maggie's group available to you. I'm not up on how many people attend that all the time, but we're hearing pretty good things about them. But we decided to ask the question, what you feel is most valuable. Because if you thought that morning thing was most valuable part of this whole thing, we'd just expand that maybe and tone this part down. But as you can see by the big spike here, everybody seems to agree that the informative part of the meeting that we're doing right now is probably the most important, and we're doing it pretty well. Courtney says she has something online. Let's go ahead and...
I have a comment online from Wendy Couch. She just wanted to remind you that the Federal Records Officers Network usually have their meetings on Tuesdays.
True.
And that so they're not as convenient.
Is it in the morning or afternoon?
They're in the afternoon, 1 to
Usually
3.
in the afternoon.
All right, that's a good piece of information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I would also point out that this slide was to remind people that there are 3 parts to Bridge. So when we sort of planned this bi-monthly records and information discussion group, we saw it as a chance to talk to the Federal Records Center program, the account reps in person, a chance to talk to appraisal teams. And we've been doing this for, I want to say, over 5 years, maybe longer, that we've had these different sessions. But it never hurts to sort of stop and ask, is it still valuable for you? Are you getting information that you want? So in a way, it was a trick question, because we asked which is the most value, not does this have any value? So it's something we'd like to keep some reactions towards. So if you're continuing to fill out the survey, or you wanted to say about what your experience is and what parts you value in this, let us know. Because again, if there's ways we can improve what we do, we're certainly willing to consider it.
Do you have a question now?
No.
Or are you just, you're a mic person? Okay.
It's not.
Okay, so going a little bit deeper into that question is then we asked how long should BRIDG be? And in particular that middle section that everybody thought was valuable, this part where we are exchanging information with the federal records management community. And again, you see a pretty big spike where it seems like people are pretty happy with the 2-hour segment that we do right now. You know, if you disagree or if you have a good reason for that right now, would appreciate your feedback. And same thing online. But for the time being, it looks like by a pretty wide margin, the 2-hour threshold is about right.
Right. And as you can tell, we were thinking with that question, would shorter meetings be more effective, especially if people tell us they would prefer online meetings? Well, then that's a long time to be in front of a computer. Not kind of a long time to be sitting in these lovely velvet chairs as well. We recognize that. But nobody wanted longer. Go 3 hours. Nobody
We thought
said
that might be a possibility because if you're going to leave your job in your office anyway, and maybe some of you are commuting a long way, maybe a longer session less frequently would be better. So again, just looking for feedback on that.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This was me. Oh, what content? This was where so we asked some pretty basic logistical questions. And then with our survey, we tried to get a little bit more about what are we doing that works well and what kind of content might we want to know about BRIDG. So we asked about the types of materials that we deliver. And what's interesting is that we're going to show later on some of the comments we had is, do you like it when NARA tells you information? Do you like it when there's more samples and interaction? So somebody gets up and says, this is, I'd like to learn more about how my agency is being successful. We talked more, people were interested in learning more about other parts of NARA, which was always interesting because this is the agency services sponsored, which means we have our colleagues in OGIS, and Amy Bennett, thank you for speaking this morning. Our colleagues in the National Declassification Center came and talked to us, our colleagues in ISU. But we thought that people were like, I'd like to even know more. Like, I wonder if they meant like the presidential libraries or research services or the Federal Register, like what does that mean? So really using BRIDG to learn more about NARA was something that we didn't know about before, but that was definitely in the data. And Jim, were there other thoughts about what the content people liked?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, you can see they're very close, but the more agency updates is kind of, more prominent than the other categories here. And we'll talk about the far end, the other category shortly here. But anyway, agency, that's you guys out there. So that's going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout the rest of this survey. As you'll see, we are really, I don't want to say desperately, but enthusiastically asking for your support in these BRIDG meetings. And a lot of people are asking to hear your story. So we're going to continue talking about that as we go on.
Okay. All right.
Now this is the fun part. This is the other category, and many people did send in their own comments and brought out some very good points that we'll take note of and talk about internally and work on in the future. And something I did here was I pulled out about 4 of the most prominent ones that are a recurring theme again, and I'll let Lisa talk a little bit more.
Right. So this was interesting. When it we had an opportunity to put the BRIDG survey, and then we left it wide open. What do you want to tell us about BRIDG? What content are you interested in? Digitization, digitization, digitization. What's interesting is that this survey was first put out, I want to say you did it.
2011. 2011 was the first one I saw.
No, but, you did it before the strategic
yes,
plan
that's true.
came out.
Yes.
So we've been asking, so before NARA said anything about the 2022 goal, digitization was a main topic, and it's only gotten stronger. So we will definitely be talking more about digitization in the future. Which also was interesting was agency stories about records management projects. It was fascinating to see how many people who, again, 800 people got the email, 160 people responded, and over again, people said, I want to hear from each other. And I will thank Wendy, as she pointed out, that's what the FRON does. So there was this ask for, I'd like to hear not just from NARA voices, but from other agency voices. So we're going to see and explore what that might mean. And it was records management, how to do implementation, and shared services keep coming up. What are people finding successful in sharing in shared services?
And a piece of good news about that, we did have about 38 people who raised their hand and volunteered to do things at these meetings. So you'll be seeing more of that, and I encourage more people to volunteer. The meeting's only held once every other month, and we're probably going to continue that since everybody seems to want to. So we can only hit so many people each time, but 38's a good start. We'd like to have more.
Right. maybe it'll be a spotlight, an agency spotlight series we can start incorporating and see how that works. We were also, the next theme was interesting, was we talk it's always interesting to me, is that, I'm the director of policy, and I have to write policy that works for every agency, regardless of your size, the types of materials you handle, so they're very generic, a lot of the policies. Digitization will be digitization for everyone. And the feedback we got was, it would be nice if you could focus on specific topics. The issues I'm facing as a small agency are not the same issues that the intelligence community faces, are not the same issues that military. So could you perhaps do some thematic bridge meetings and talk about things that are more practical, relevant to us? That was a very interesting comment, and we'll have to think about, can we do that as well?
So just out of curiosity here, raise your hand if you're from a part of the DoD or military community, just so we can kind of get an idea. Okay. How about the intelligence community?
Don't raise your hand. Don't tell me.
We
just nod. We know.
So I'm assuming everybody else then is small, kind of independent agencies
Or
and things like that. Is that
medium-
about right? Just agencies in general, civilian agencies?
Yeah.
Okay, so large cabinet level agencies?
It was
All
a
right.
very interesting thought. That can you focus bridge on some particular issues? And we might explore what that means, and maybe try to figure out if there's some themes that we can hit. And last, tools. People always like to talk about what tools are people using. So those were some of the themes that people said, please share that more at bridge meetings. And it was just good feedback to hear, because if it's something we haven't thought about for a while, or maybe can do again, we certainly would like to explore.
And that tools category is interesting because, again, that's going to have to involve you guys. I think what everybody wants to hear about is successes, and particularly with budget changes that seem to be leaning towards new IT implementations. That might be important in the future to see who's been successful and what they've been successful with, so that new implementations can be just as successful.
All right.
This one was pretty clear. So we asked people if they were willing to participate in the planning process or in helping us out with Bridge. So by and large,
No, I'm good. You do what you want, Nora. I'll give you my feedback. We'll let you know how it goes. So this was, and that was fine, absolutely fine. So we are going to keep planning and looking at Bridge, looking at, how is it meeting your needs? How is it achieving its goal, right? Because the goal of Bridge is to have discussions for agency records officers or records management personnel, and Nara to talk about issues. So we will continue doing planning. The good news is that we're a few people who said they'd be willing. And I would say again, if there's a topic that you wanted to share, I'm going to say again, it's james.stossel@nara.gov. And if this is, I was thinking about what you said, and yes, maybe there's a theme I'd like to share, and I'm not committing to planning, but I could commit to participating in a thing like that. Or I never really thought about a themed activity before, a tool before. Also, I'd like to see a demonstration. That wouldn't be easy to do online, but maybe there's something we could do with the post or pre-meetings that would just be a demonstration at some time. So we'll see what we can do. This is a good one. We wanted to know if you were comfortable talking. The interesting part is that for most part, people said, yes, I have no problem asking questions at Bridge. So I will ask you, how do you react to this statement? And if nobody says anything, I will know this is not true.
yeah, even though people said they feel comfortable asking questions, I mean, we normally don't get a lot at these sessions. And it's kind of it makes us wonder why. Is it the technology, or is it just the fact that you view these as information push type sessions where you don't have a lot of questions, you're just waiting, you're soaking up information? So if anybody has any kind of feedback on that, like how you're feeling when you're sitting out there in the audience, and are you just waiting to hear the great information that NAR is putting out? It'd be great to hear about that. How about that?
Or as we joke, I make comments all the time, but they're under my breath to the person next to me. They don't really need to be on stage. Anyway. No? All right, so you're comfortable, but you just don't want to talk right now. That's fine to hear.
Okay, so same thing again. Now we're getting into the real interesting part of the survey, which is individual comments. So again, you can see we got quite a few in that other category, suggestions to make Bridge better. You can see about 72 people responded So that's pretty good. And we got a lot of different things to discuss. And what I did again was pulled out a number of them. There's about 3 slides with about 4 or 5 things each that we just want to touch on, and maybe you have some comments to expand on them some.
Right. And the comments, the themes were, again, there was some content. I'd really be interested in the transfer process. So help us get records through that transfer, which is always
And the
a key
person
point.
who asked this one specifically mentioned they're not talking about FRCs because they think that they understand that pretty
Yeah.
well. They're talking about the permanent record transfer to NARA. So raise your hand. People feel like they're having problems with that and you want more information on that, we could include it in a future session. I see some heads nodding, so that's okay, good.
And what I also thought was fun was that this slides that then I got to very practical. What about having, since we've always said every time we get up here, we understand there's a latency, and that those of you who are watching us on YouTube are about 24 seconds behind what we're actually saying. So why not have a virtual session for a like if you want to do a virtual conversation, have a virtual meeting separate or concurrent with the in-person meeting. Communicate better about when BRIDG is coming, which we certainly can take that as our end. Simply email the slides out before the meeting, so maybe you can follow along and know what's going to be happened. And one that I had to say, it really kind of hit me, as somebody who has staff spread throughout the country, we have not considered other time zones. We have been 9, 10, and 1 for a very long, long time. So we should consider, would a different time zone help get more participation from all of our colleagues across the country?
So 2 of these I feel like I can do something about, the communicating better about the meetings and emailing the slides. I just want to mention to you guys that involves some things on your part too. If you know or don't know about this, we use something called the RM Communications Listserv to send out BRIDG meeting information. That's so it's not an email that comes out directly from me or directly from Lisa or one of us. It's coming through a system that might get snagged by your email system. Those kind of things. And we know there's been a particular problem with that in DoD and the Intel community. So I'm looking at different ways to communicate directly through them and get the information to them. The other side of it is, though, too, you're on that list, and people seem to be asking for more communication and doing this kind of thing better. So I just hope you understand that, so far you've been getting maybe 1 or 2 emails a month, and that's probably about, I think, a good level, maybe 1, 2, or 3 emails a month. I don't want to increase it too much. But please, if you get something or you feel like you want to communicate something with us, let us know. And you have to sign up for the list, of course, just like any other email list that you're signed up with that you're involved in the civilian world. So if you are interested in records management, please sign up for the list if you haven't already. I've seen some more activity there, so I think more people are becoming aware of that's how we communicate about this stuff. So if you're not signed up, please do. If you've changed positions or something like that and want to be deleted, let us know that too so that we keep our list fresh and we're not spamming people. Just those kind of issues. You know how that works in the regular world. So if you're interested in this thing, when we send you something, please either communicate back or sign up or whatever it's asking you to do. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Hey,
Yay!
one recommendation, instead of emailing the slides, because that's how things get snagged, get a box on your NARA site to put the slides in so people can go there and get the slides.
That's a good suggestion. And we do that after the meetings, of course. We post them on the regular archives.gov website, the public one. So we'll talk about that and see what we can do as far as getting them out in advance and posting them somewhere we can pull them down. Because I think a lot of things are getting snagged when they have an attachment, that's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for that suggestion. And then we have one final...
Another suggestion from Tommy Lee. He suggested passing out index cards to the audience to write down questions.
Oh.
That's very good, and I think it actually comes up here next where ask for questions in advance. Yes. So that's great. I'm glad he asked that one, and that's another good thing we'll think about both in the meeting and prior to the meeting, trying to solicit questions in advance and getting the slides out so you have time to think about questions you might have.
Yes, and this last slide, again, was very logistically focused about improving our technology, improving our website, which we would definitely like to do, and we're making small steps in that direction. And if we can, we also got the last suggestion, which was to focus on the 2019 requirements. I appreciated that the timing was absolutely right, and if there's anything that's coming for 2019 success, to manage all permanent electronic records electronically, we can start using that as some of the stories to share and have more information about how to hit that target.
And
So,
as far
yeah.
as improving technology, we've done a little bit of the things that you can see already, getting more mics so that they're out there in the audience and you can access them easier. Of course, a little bit harder in the middle, but I'm trying to sprinkle a few into the middle so it's easier to do that as well. We're trying to use YouTube mainly to open the meetings to the public. At large, these meetings are open to the public as well as to the government community. So that's a little bit harder to switch off to something else. I mean, we've started using things like WebEx and that internally, but that's not really conducive to making this a public-type meeting. And there is a delay factor of about a minute with YouTube. So just be aware of that when you're watching through YouTube. You can still ask questions and everything, as you can see here. It just takes us about a minute to digest it and circulate it to the people in the room. Oh, and there you see again, there's two of them on there again, solicit questions in advance of bridge meetings and involve agencies. Again, that's you guys. So I really hope that more and more people become involved in this and help us make these better and more useful to you.
And I think just in closing, I'd like to point out, it was on the earlier slide, the survey, it's still open. So if you had some suggestions, you're more than welcome to go fill out and let your voice be heard, especially for those of you who are like, no, I want Mondays. I want to vote for Monday. Or if you had a question that just having thought about, knowing that we were interested in your feedback on how successful Bridge is for you, you can feel free to send us an email directly, and we'll be happy to take that into consideration. And I hope that in the future, at another Bridge meeting, we'll be able to sort of say, hey, here are the changes we're making. Or here's, we looked at what we did and we decided we're going to keep on meeting every Wednesday, every other month. But at least you would know we thought about it, thought about what works best. And I appreciate all the feedback you've given us today and will continue to give us in the future.
Okay, so this is the very
I'm sorry, I
last
thought it was
slide
last
with these
slide.
kind of things on it.
Never mind.
But I'm really interested in a few of these. The first one I said would come back to this issue. The pre-meeting that we have upstairs with the folks from the FRCs and the post-meeting that we have with the appraisal staff, I'd really like to get some feedback from you today and the people online as well. Do you feel like those are valuable, or do we need to change them in some way to make them more valuable to you? The people are in the room right now that can affect that, so we'd really like to hear from you. Yes?
Hi, yes, Catherine Findlay with DOCOIG, and I just wanted to comment that I am very appreciative of the after meeting where I can do a face-by-face with my archivist, with DOC, and then I can also interact with other people that potentially have the same challenges I have in my position with OIG. Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's exactly the kind of thing we'd like to hear. Does anybody else have an opposing viewpoint or any other ideas about what we should do with those things? All right, well, feel free, send emails or take the survey again or whatever you want to do to get some feedback to us. Or you can still do it online. There's a delay there, so go ahead and put your comments in. Oh, the second one, time for more Q&A periods in each meeting, and this is in general. And you're going to see today, right after Lisa and I are done, we're going to do kind of the first around that kind of idea. We're going to have a panel of managers from within NARA that are going to cover a few topics that are important, and then they're going to open it up to the audience for questions. And we really hope you get involved in that, and you're asking for it, so we're starting to open up to you to ask whatever questions are on your mind about issues and things. Do you see one, Lisa? That you want?
The various areas. The rest of these is what are you doing in the other areas of records management, which we assumed meant, the training program, appraisal, the policy, the oversight, which if they meant something else beyond that, we'd need more clarity on what you meant by other areas of records management. But so we need to figure out what that meant.
And the next one about immediate feedback with using surveys during the meeting. I've already thought of that because I've been in some really interesting meetings where we did that with like 2,500 people in the room or so, and instant feedback type surveys. In this room, it's a little bit difficult because of the situation with Wi-Fi and things like that, but I'm investigating some things we might be able to do so that those of you who feel a little uncomfortable with standing up and talking still would have a way to give some feedback through the mechanisms of the meeting.
Yeah, and then last but not least, which is a very interesting idea, was a little concrete, hands-on training topic where you could kind of sort of say, can we bring up and do like a training topic of the week in Bridge that some people come here for some real concrete, practical advice. That's something we could add to the Bridge mix.
Yeah, and there were a lot of comments throughout the survey about that. Some people called them how-tos. Some people called them training, those kind of things, but more practical examples and more practical discussion, which Gary's team does in some of the training that he does out in the community. So, Anybody feel like that's a good idea and we should do a lot more of that, or we should have one in each one? Okay, I'm seeing some people respond to that. Okay, good.
And that was the end of the slide. I'm sorry, I missed that last slide there to our closing. So I'll reclose again and just say, please continue to give us your feedback. And hopefully if you see some changes in the bridge going forward, we will be because of what you told us.
And thanks for participating in the survey. We'll do it again next year, and maybe a few more questions and things. Thanks very much.
Okay. We're missing Don coming? Don's not here. Okay. I'm going to be Don today. You're going to do Don today? All right. All right, we're going to go into our last session, or our last piece for today. And if you do remember, a few months ago, NARA sent out a draft strategic plan for the agency. That now is no longer a draft plan. It is the NARA strategic plan moving forward, 2018 to 2022, I believe it is. And we're going to have an open discussion today. There are some strategic priorities around that. And let me introduce the folks we have with us today. We have Lawrence Brewer, the Chief Records Officer, David Weinberg, the Director of the Federal Records Center Program, Maggie Hawkins, Director of Records Management Operations, Lisa Hara-Lampis, the Director of Records Management Policy and Outreach, and Gary Rauchfuss, the Director of Records Management Training for National Archives. Okay.
Thanks, Gordon. So I'm going to start by thanking Jim for setting the panel up. This is our attempt to try something new. So we're coming to you today to talk a little bit about our programs and our areas of responsibility, but really what we want to do with this panel is have some discussion with you. So as Jim said, and Lisa said, this is not a solutions session. But what we really like to do with this time that we have left today is hear from you about what your priorities are with records management and how they intersect with NARA and what you need from us. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we see from our perspectives as program managers, whether it's the Record Centers program, policy, training, or oversight, and then try and tease out from the discussion today how what we do connects with you in those areas. And hopefully we'll hear from you about some very specific things that we should be aware of, can work on, can produce, and really put on our agenda as priorities for us to work on with you at the National Archives. So why don't we start by going through the panel. We've already done some introductions, but I wanted to invite everybody here to provide a little bit of context and some perspective about the program areas, what our priorities are, to sort of focus the discussion for the rest of the panel. So, David, I'll turn it to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back meeting with all of you. Within the Federal Record Centers program, we're really focused on a post-till environment that Scott Rowley spoke about before. Now we have space and ample space in almost every one of the FRCs around the country to store your agency records and to service your agency records. So we're really focused on providing quality, timely services to all of our federal customers. We're focused on getting ready for 2023 and the transition to becoming a pure electronic records government, and eliminating the ability to store hard copy analog records within the Federal Record Center systems. We realize that's a big change, and for all of you, for all of us, and we're spending a lot of time getting ready for that. And we're also doing a lot of outreach. We have the account managers who are here, many of them are here. We have the account managers, some based here in DC, others strategically placed around the country. They are meeting with all of you to be certain we're meeting your needs, and so we can together get ready for 2023. So again, I certainly encourage the opportunity for you to meet with them, the account managers, both here and at their various localities around the country, and you can access their locations on the NARA website. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I'm here today to discuss what may be coming up with the strategic plan. Lawrence mentioned that it's now final, and how that may have an impact on record scheduling and appraisal and some other functions within my area. Although I'd like to first talk about that. With the strategic plan, we are looking at quote unquote modernizing appraisal processes. So what that'll mean is, first off, is we are in the middle of a business process reengineering for ERA that is being led by other units within NARA, including information services and the IT people. But ERA is something that probably touches all of you in the audience if you are scheduling records or transferring records. And it was developed a number of years ago. And we are now looking at what could be done differently with ERA. How could the scheduling part of it be different? How could the transfer part of it be different? And that is an ongoing effort. So as some of you may have already done so, there was a participation session for agencies. We'd really like to know from an agency's perspective, what's working well with ERA, what's not working well, what might change, what might be improved upon. There's also an online session coming up, and there was an RM communication that listed the dates and the contact information to participate in those. And I'd really like to encourage people to participate. We also did some agency focus groups back in 2013 and 2016. If you participated in those, that feedback was brought forward to the BPR, even the stuff as long ago as 2013. But having fresh feedback is always useful and helpful. And especially for those of you who use ERA a lot, it's going to have a big impact on, it's like to turn on a system every day or a few times a week. It can make things really great, or it can make things really tough. So we are pretty much cracking that all open and examining it all. So anything you could offer on that would be very helpful. Also, we will, as part of the strategic plan, there will be obviously an increased emphasis on digitizing records. And that has an intersection with the scheduling and appraisal process. Currently, agencies typically will participate in what we call the media neutral notification process. So let's say you have a bunch of paper records and you're about to scan them. The proper way to handle that is we have a form online, and you indicate that you're planning on scanning them, and we kind of work through whatever issues may be involved in that. That process and how that will continue in the future is something we are currently examining. So we have to look at, how burdensome is that to agencies? How burdensome is the process within NARA? But then there's also, we have to think about, it gives us a chance to see how things are going with that process with an agency, troubleshoot any questions or concerns in advance. So we have to weigh out all these various internal and external considerations, and we're in the process of looking at that now. So I would say those two things are the two big areas in records management operations that we are working on. Also, the third thing, Marcus, who's on my staff, spoke about the ambiguous disposition codes. And it's 4 million plus cubic feet, and that is also in my area as well, and that can help with this larger effort in terms of freeing up space in the record center for other people to move records in. Also, as we move more to a digital environment, it's just time to grapple with all these records that have been sitting there in some cases for more than 30 years. So you may be contacted by someone if you have records that fit that category with some potential strategies and ways of handling them. And that's going to be another major effort that we have been undertaking starting in the last fiscal year or so. That's all I have.
Well, thanks, everybody. Nice to talk to you again, this time from the perspective of priorities for records management from the policy and outreach team. I am going to say the same thing my two other colleagues here on the table did. It's about digitization. And I'm going to frame it that in August of 2017, the philosophy got flipped on its head. The philosophy prior to the strategic plan coming out was that digitization efforts were done for access. And NARA would determine, am I going to take the paper, or will I also want to take, or only want to take, the scanned copies? The strategic plan has flipped that, and the strategic plan says NARA will take electronic copies only. So the guidance that we had been working on, we had to sort of pause and go back and realize all of our shoulds and recommendations and things to consider had to be rethought. So our priority is to get out digitization guidance with that new perspective. And I am saying digitization guidance because, as Maggie just mentioned, there are many parts to digitization guidance. Our priority is to get out standards via a NARA bulletin that will describe the standards that have to be followed to digitize permanent records. If you're going to take something in a paper format or in another format, what standard do you follow? So they weren't written from that perspective before. But in addition to digitization standards, what's an exception process look like? What does the notification process look like? What is the authority we have to dispose of the originals? So those are there are a lot of dependencies that we're looking towards for digitization guidance. I don't believe you're going to see a aha package tied up with a pretty bow that says, here's everything you need. I believe what you're going to see is us sort of saying, this is what we know now. This is the piece we can put out now. We have clarified the notification process. We have issued the standards. So you'll be looking for a lot of pieces of digitization guidance coming out as we work on the various priorities for this year. In addition to that, that's the 22 digitization priority. We are also focused on the 2019 priority of how do you manage the things that are already born digital. And I will say our priority there is the success criteria that we are looking forward to issue. I want to say it's now weeks. Used to be months. We're now hopefully going to have something that we can put out in several weeks. That would be a guidance product to help say, this is what we need to focus on 2019. The 2019-22 goal also talks about what else can we do to help agencies be prepared for a fully digital government. And that priority has been, you've heard us talk about it several times here at BRIDG and other venues, our FERMI initiative, the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, FERMI. I'm sorry, I had to close my eyes to make sure I said it correctly. But what it is, and just to recap, is we continue to work with GSA to say how we make it easier and more effective for agencies to get tools, solutions, services, and shared services. So that has been our partnership with GSA and the category managers there, as well as our partnership with the Unified Shared Services Management Office, USSM. So we are continuing that work. We are continuing the success criteria. We are continuing with digitization. Those are the top three. The secondary priorities after those top three priorities are we are actually continuing to work on web guidance, and I mean web 1.0. We have realized, it's been 10 years since NARA's looked at the guidance that we've talked about with agency web pages, and given the issues that surrounded a lot of records management questions and access questions that came up in transition, we're looking at that. We continue to look at electronic messaging issues. We continue to look at email implementation issues. So I would say there are three big pushes that are our priorities for this year, and then there are several sub-priorities that have not changed. And over to you, Gary.
Well, thank you, Lisa. So good morning, everybody. For those that may not know me, I'm Gary Ruff, the Director of Training Program. As always, our main priority is executing the training that you send your folks to. And so that remains the first thing on our list to do every day when we come to work. Certainly working through that during our continuing resolutions has been a challenge. We've been fortunate for the most part not to really have to do too many cancellations, and got lucky with some of the dates the convicts picked and where they fell in our training calendar. But I'd also encourage you as you go back to think about now, these next few weeks. We have certainly seen, because of the last CR, some really, really low class numbers, particularly here in Washington. So if you have folks that need training and you've got this money to spend over the next month, a great time. We've got a series coming up towards the end of February, early March, that's here at Archives 1 as opposed to College Park. Plenty of seats, and that's fairly rare for us. Normally when we do the training here, we're turning folks away, and pretty large number of folks. That, it's easier for the folks to work in Washington to come to training here. So just take a look at that over the next few months. As we've talked about a lot over the last 12 to 18 months, we are knee-deep in revising the curriculum, making a lot of progress on that. We'll be rolling out the first new course at the end of February for a pilot run, and we'll do that with folks from our staff as well as volunteers that we've gotten from different agencies to give us feedback on that. And we'll continue that, so the first level of curriculum should be done this summer, and we'll start rolling that out for full implementation in the fall. Meanwhile, the design and development of the second level is ongoing, and we appreciate everybody that helped us with collecting how you do those tasks. And as you were walking in this morning, in the middle at the back of the theater, there's a table with some flyers on it. There's also a sheet there for all of you, because they're also in the beginning stages of kicking off the analysis for that third level. So we need to come back out to many of you and say, of these tasks that we have in this level, would you be willing to be interviewed? Tell us how you do it. Because certainly one of the changes that we've looked at in this curriculum is being more specific about how do you do these things, rather than just in our training telling you, hey, you need to take care of this. So a lot of the work we're doing is based off what you were doing in your agencies and how you've told us that you're doing that work. So we want to get that going along the way with the third level. Now, in all of those, one of the steps we've taken with the strategic plan was to back up and go, let's put everything related to digitization and electronic records at the front of what we're doing. There was very little in that first level of the curriculum that needed to be adjusted. But the second level, we grabbed all of the electronic records related tasks. One of them is Plan a Digitization Project. That's under development right now. So again, we've tried to look at what are the most high priority things of what we're doing related to where NARA is going and the work that you'll have to do, put them at the front of our development efforts. And again, we will roll those out to you as quickly as we can. We will make sure we do some trials and testing with them, but once we've done that, we'll make them available so that they're there for you to use as you work through this transition. And then the third part for us is always, what can we do for you that we're not doing in some ways, right? So we periodically get requests to do custom training or to help advise you on training, or maybe to come to you to do the training different than what we do with you coming to us. That remains on the table always, and I encourage you, if you have needs that we can help you meet, to contact us, and we'll do what we can for you, and try to work out the best way we can support getting your folks trained in your agencies for the work you're asking them to do. So Lawrence, back to you.
Thanks, Gary. So in the Office of the Chief Records Officer, we have 4 programs. 3 of them are represented here. So the program that is not represented is Oversight and Reporting. So Don Rosen, who's the Director of Oversight and Reporting, he's actually out on an inspection today. So I told him to go do what you need to do there, and I'll cover for you today. So from the oversight perspective, you all are all familiar with reporting. We're right now in the middle of the reporting period, closes on March 16th. Very similar to last year with the records management self-assessment, the email report, and then the SAO RM reports, which are all due on the 16th. So hopefully that's going smoothly. And if you have any questions, we have a dedicated mailbox that you can send your questions to. The other things that we do in oversight and reporting, one are inspections, which are more formal and I think most people are more familiar with, in which we are looking at compliance with existing laws and regulations. But we started this year a pilot, and I know several of the agencies potentially in the room or online were involved, where we did a less formal agency on-site assessment. And the assessment that we did this year as a pilot had to do with email implementation. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about and maybe have some discussion today on behalf of Don is the assessments are different in that they focus on records management topics. So whereas in inspection, we're going into an agency and looking at the agency and how they're doing in terms of compliance. With an assessment, while we're still looking at compliance, we're focused on topics. So I think there's an opportunity here where we can hear from you, what are the topics, what are the challenges that you're facing in your agency that we might want to put on our list to queue up as something to come out to a bunch of agencies at the same time and sort of explore that, with the goal being a report that identifies best practices, lessons learned, that we can then share amongst the records management community. So I think that's something that I think is worth having some discussion in terms of oversight. Of course, I'm happy to take back comments and take some notes. I've got my pad, got my pen, about how we are doing in other areas in terms of, what improvements could we make in the areas of reporting, and our engagements with agencies in other areas like inspections. So before we get into the discussion, I thought I'd bring up the next slide just for context. So the budget was released on Monday. Some of you may have had an opportunity to review the budget and the priorities that are discussed in there. The goals are the same, and they are very similar to what we discussed at the last BRIDG meeting in December, where we had a panel talking about these key priorities. The three that are on this slide are the three primarily agency-facing strategic goals, 2.4, 3.1, and 3.2, with 3.2 being the big one. So we did have some opportunity to really talk about it in December, but we didn't really have the Q&A and the discussion that I was hoping to have. There was simply just a lot of material to cover. So what we want to do now is we want to stop talking and then hear from you about some of the things, maybe some reactions that you have to the priorities that the panel has talked about in terms of our priorities, hear a little bit about what your priorities are and how they connect to those priorities, and then see if there are any higher level strategic things, topics that you want to talk about related to the strategic plan initiatives and objectives that were released on Monday. So with that, microphones are on the aisles. We have Jim monitoring the chat. Tell us what you think. What's on your mind? Great. I thought we were all going to crash and burn together, but we got questions queued up. Great.
That's great. I couldn't allow that to happen. I'm glad you mentioned the part about the assessments. I actually work for the Federal Records Center program and Records Management Consulting Services, and we do those similar types of assessments. And what we've discovered is that many of these agencies lack resources. And we find ourselves typically doing the findings and observations and then making recommendations for them to get those programs up and running, meeting the needs that, meeting the shortfalls that they may have. A lot of what they're facing out there, and this is just my opinion from what I've seen, is actually developing the records management program so that it's compliant and functional. And they don't often have the resources in place to make that happen. So we end up, as Records Management Consulting Services, doing a lot of the boots on the ground type of stuff to help them get there. My question is, we have all these drivers, the directors, the Records Management Directive, and the new strategic plan. Question is, once we put these drivers out there, what kind of resources, in addition to what we're currently doing in Records Management Consulting Services, would we be able to provide for the records management community to help them get up to speed? Because they don't have it. That's what we're seeing.
So I'll take the first stab at that, and thanks, Barry, for the question. We stood up the Records Management Consulting Services within the Federal Record Centers program to provide the boots on the ground. It's limited in staff. We're hoping to expand that in the months ahead. But that team is providing critical assistance to agencies in dealing with modern records management challenges. But you're right, it's still a financial resource. We are, as everyone knows, a fee-for-service operation. So when we provide consulting services, we charge a fee for those services. And that's what brings out Barry and David Miller, who's here in the room, and that whole team. But again, once it's done, it's up to the agencies to get the resources, and there's not much we can do beyond providing skilled expertise for hire. There's many people who provide records and management consulting services outside the government. We're the inside the government, inside the National Archives provider for that. But after the work is done, it's going to take the resources that have to come from the agencies. That's a tough nut to crack. But again, it really does come down, at least in my view, as a financial limitation.
So I'll just add to that. I mean, I think you're saying, I think, what a lot of us are thinking. And we're speaking for NARA, and I'm sure many of the agencies in the room, we're heading into some pretty austere times. And what we have been trying to do on our end is, in the past, we used to issue guidance that basically told agencies, here's what you need to do. And what we've been very sensitive to and tried to do, and I don't want to speak for Gary or for Lisa, but we've been trying to develop more practical guidance that goes a step further, that gets into some of the how-tos, and I know training and overall within the program, trying to provide the kinds of job aids and resources so that agencies can do things on their own, because we understand that there are resources, challenges on our end, and they are on the agency end as well. So we're trying to do more with the guidance that we're producing that will allow agencies to be more efficient and effective about what they need to do. It's a point for discussion, whether we're being successful doing that. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we send out surveys, whether it's about BRIDG or a customer satisfaction survey. We want to know how we're doing in that and whether this is actually meeting the need. But that is our intent, because we've recognized resources have always been a problem. Is probably going to be an additional challenge given the climate that we're in, but it's always been a challenge. So how can we do more with what we have so that agencies can do better at what they need to do?
And I'll just take a second to add to that and say that, as we have looked at the training program, the one course we have on setting up your program and running it really doesn't get much at strategic management of it or strategic planning. So in fact, the top task on our list that we're looking for your input in is develop a strategic plan for your records management program. Because we see that as one of those fundamental places where if we're not accurately bringing our requirements to the table for senior leaders to make decisions about, and over the long term, not just next year, but what's your 3 or 5 year plan so that you can actually work on garnering those resources against the competing demands that you have in your agencies. But can you tell a compelling story with your strategic plan that gets your leaders to invest in the program? And so we'll be looking to capture how many of you are doing that and then craft a way that we can share with everybody about a good way to get at that in the long run.
I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but in thinking about the resources and the availability of the resources, especially when we're talking about the digitization of the records. And number one, I'm trying to understand if we don't have the resources, and in my agency leadership is very much invested in this whole the whole records management process. I don't have any kickback from them. They fully engaged. The whole agency is fully engaged. However, resources is an issue, and with them doing their own prioritization for the agency, digitization of the older records may not rise to the top of the priority list. Not because they don't care, it just doesn't rise to the top of the priority list. So then what are going to be the implications for the agency if we're unable to meet it simply because of resources, not because we don't want to or we haven't done, what we can. We're just unable to meet it. What are going to be the implications to the agency?
The current thing I could share with you is the strategic plan statement that if you can send those paper records to a Federal Record Center program prior to 2022, they will not have to be digitized. So the resources would be the storage cost resources until they're ready for transfer, visa the digitization costs and the maintenance until they're ready to transfer. So you'd have to look at that cost-benefit analysis to maybe make some recommendations of which bill is smaller.
So,
That's all I can say right there from the plan itself. I'm sorry.
okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
But you made it.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a good answer then. I was like, oh, she's like, think about that.
Let me
But
give
yes.
you a chance to think about your thought and talk, take it up another level. So in terms of priorities, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do, and hopefully we're all working together on this, is getting our senior agency official for records management involved in the process. So these are the people who can advocate for records management and the resources needed to work on those priorities. So yes, in many cases, the priorities are going to be set at that level, but having a senior agency official who's responsible for records management, theoretically, and this is where we can have some discussion, theoretically, is providing support for records management within the agency. So that is our first step. How can we work with them, the SAARMs, who in many cases are CIOs in departments and in agencies, to get this to their attention? The other thing that we have been doing is working very closely with the Office of Management and Budget. So through that partnership, we're hoping to approach it from a different perspective, where OMB, via Circular A130, reaches directly to CIOs and a different community, which is information management, than we typically have done in the past. So we're trying to bring that together and then put that all together, and then you can get to what are the implications. Well, if we have OMB on board with what we want to do, then we have a much stronger case in determining and communicating with agencies about what the implications might be if we're not in compliance with not only NARA, but OMB directives. So did you remember what you were going to say?
No, but I am just going to comment that in my agency, our SAO is the deputy director of the agency. So that's why I said we're fully
Lots of priorities on his desk.
Right. We're fully invested, and it's, even with just our new budget, we've had to take a cut, you know, like most agencies, so I just don't know.
But certainly, moving it down just a little bit to the grassroots, Lawrence was talking at a higher level. As the comment was raised earlier, the records can be, there could be an accelerated retirement to the record centers. If you wish to do that, we can do a cost-benefit analysis to say what would that cost be by retiring them early versus any kind of digitization after the fact. And in fact, one of the survey questions that was addressed earlier, or at least at the high level, one of the questions was, are you planning to accelerate sending paper records to the federal record centers? And 48% said yes. And the confluence of time and, the fact that the till disposal is complete, we have capacity, means we can take them. And our goal was really to try to help agencies manage their hard copy records, if they wish to pursue it, within the FRCs prior to 2022.
Yes.
Questions?
How are you doing?
Keep talking.
My name is Louis Quick. I'm from DHS INA. My question was regarding the FRC. I understand that you all are making big strides to destroying records from the lift. However, right. I'm being told by my HQ records officer that you guys don't have any space for classified records, and that's all I deal with. So what are the efforts right. you all are doing to kind of clear up that space, since we only have one facility to gather all our class? And second question is transitioning electronic records. Like I said before, all I deal with is class. What's the guidance for this 3.2 goal when it comes to electronic classified records being transitioned to the National Archives?
So let me address the first question first, and I may sort of punt the second question to our colleagues, and that is classified records are stored exclusively at the Washington National Record Center. in Suitland, Maryland. We do have space. I'm looking to Lawrence, maybe to Scott. Scott may know about the amount of cubic footage available at WNRC in the classified vaults. There is space. It's not, it's not abundant, but it's certainly, I think, enough to handle all projected storage requirements. Scott, any speculation? And if not, we can get back about that.
I'd say just let's have the conversation of what your volumes are, particular series. We do have more space than we used to have. We also have opportunities to move records out of the vaults and into other spaces in some cases. So it may not be entirely out of the, sky's the limit. There's a lot of classified records out there. We can't hold everything in Suitland, but we could definitely have a good conversation, and I think there's tens of thousands of feet available if we needed it.
And as far as classified records post-2022, the Federal Records Centers program will not be managing or handling or servicing any electronic records. So as far as classified electronic records, that's not going to fall within our venue. The decision has been made that we're sort of, focusing on analog records and storing them up until 2022. After that point, we will manage what we have within our system, but not accepting any additional analog records, but we will not be accepting electronic records.
And I will share that as an area where we are actively discussing inside of the archives of how to handle the systems, the tools, and the scanning needs for classified electronic records that have to meet the 2022 goal. Where does scanning fit? And there is a lot of questions that have to be answered. So I just want to say your question's very timely, and I don't have any answers, but I can assure you that that's definitely being discussed. What does the practical implications for 2022 for classified paper records? So hopefully we'll have more information to share at a later date and more conversations to have.
Good morning. Troy Manigault, Departmental Records Officer at Energy. My question, and I appreciate the strategic plan, particularly the addition of the fullest extent possible. Are you all planning, I imagine you probably are, defining what that is in terms of exception or exemption to fullest extent so that we can prepare in advance and understand where we have some wiggle room and where we do not? And also the unintended consequences perhaps of that planning and how some of these records, if they do not meet the exception or exemption, might end up in other than Federal Record Center locations, which could present in and of themselves risk if they're not properly vetted for handling.
Right.
Thanks for the question, Troy. And just want to let everybody know, one of the things that we never do is go over 12 o'clock because we don't want to get in the way of anybody having a good lunch. But I will say the short answer is yes. It is something we are aware of that we do need to flesh out and work with. However, we don't want that to stop any agency from coming to talk to us about their particular situation. In a lot of ways, what the strategic plan was putting something out there so that we could have a conversation with agencies about the specifics, drilling down in each of the goals. So if there are exceptions that you think you might have to have some discussions with NARA, please let us know. Don't wait. Because it might help us really figure it out more broadly for the rest of the agencies in the government. But it is something we're aware of. We know we need to work on it, but please come talk to us now. We maybe have time for maybe one
Lawrence,
more.
I've got one online that we've been
Okay.
holding since the beginning of the show here. So Chris Baker at WICA asked the question, hold on. It just disappeared. NARA issued GRS number 29 back in December. GRS transmittal number 29, December 2017. Is that the final big bucket schedule approach, or will there be a scaled down version coming out this summer?
That is the end. That is the last GRS transmittal for doing the new GRS. So I'm not sure what's meant by scaled down, but that pretty much covered it. There may be other GRS items that come out subsequent to that, but that's the last major one.
Time for one more quick question in the room. Okay, here we go.
Hi, this is Shay Gonzalez. I'm with the Record Management Consulting Services program as well. And I am also one of the people that goes out to the agencies and see some of their problems and concerns. And one of the things that they do appreciate is that there are bulletins and blogs and et cetera with the RM communications. But one thing that I would just suggest or maybe open when a new policy or new blog entry or something that comes out, if there can just be like a little quick Q&A session that comes out with it, just because a lot of times when we go out, we're explaining what those policies are. Also within the training program, another thing, and it sounds like y'all are working on it, is helping the records managers be able to articulate to the various stakeholders. So not just, a lot of times with the strategic plan, it's a lot about focusing on the SAOs or speaking to your leadership, but also if you can help the records officers be able to communicate effectively with the IT departments as well as their inspector generals. I know that there are classes for like the lawyers, but a lot of the new records officers, because a lot of them, let's face it, have been assigned it as a collateral duty, and they're not coming from that background, if that's something that we can possibly put in the queue.
Excellent suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we all have to leave and go get something to eat, but I wanted to encourage you all, if you have comments, suggestions, we'd be happy to take them via email, and I can promise you we'll try and do more of these kinds of sessions so that we can have more back and forth on particular topics. So I want to thank you for your participation and thank everybody here for sitting up under the bright lights. And we will see you next time. I think we have possibly, a slide for our next meeting, April 24th, and we will see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And don't forget, this afternoon, appraisal teams 2 and 4 from 1 o'clock to